In this video, you'll see an onboard hot lap with some basic references and cues to look out for, and then for those looking to broaden their knowledge even further, I'll take you on a complete track walk where we'll discover all the intricacies and nuances of the circuit and car combination, as well as how to extract the most out of your time on the track. On screen now are some timestamps for if you want to skip to a different part of the video. They are split by each individual corner of the circuit that I'll cover. So without further ado, let's begin with the onboard hot lap video. So coming out of the final corner here at Brands Hatch, we're in the Toyota 86 Gr.4 car. Looking down into turn 1, paddock hill bend, looking at the 2-board just before the 2-board, slowly releasing the brake pressure, using all the track available to you on the exit, but be careful of the gravel. Into Druids, the 1-board, just before the 1-board, keeping the car nice and stable, coasting, using the coasting of the car, and then bringing the car out wide. Into Graham Hill Bend, careful not to clip the grass on the outside or the inside. Wide exit out. Down into Surtees, we're looking for a late apex, so wide entry, braking at the 1-board. Wide entry, clip the inside, don't touch the grass on the outside for a good exit out. Down to Pilgrim's Drop, obviously taking the line of least resistance. And looking into Hawthorne Bend, just after the 2-board, between the 2-board and the 1-board, we're going to be keeping the car nice and stable, don't touch the grass on the inside. Then into Westfield, looking just before the 1-board, taking all the curb available, all the curb on the exit, careful not to run out onto the gravel. Into Dingledale, staying over to the left, then for Sheens, braking at the 1-board, taking the curb that's there, but be careful not to run wide on the exit. Into Stirling's, about the 1-board. Again, keep the car stable, don't run onto the grass on the exit. Final corner, Clark curb, just before the 1-board. And we're going to be careful of the elevation changes. Means we can get on the power a bit earlier. Careful not to run out wide, and that's your hot lap of Brands Hatch. So let's begin this track walk in the Gr.4 cars at Brands Hatch. So coming into turn 1, Paddock Hill Bend, we're going to be starting our vision at the 2-board. So we're going to be looking out for this 2-board on the left hand side of the track. That could be a good place to start braking. You want to progress a little bit further than this, so the end of the fence on the left hand side has a really nice green and white stripy sort of panel to it. That's where I would normally suggest braking, maybe even a little bit further, just above that, where this tannoy system thing is. So looking beyond that, Paddock Hill Bend curves in on entry, so that means we're not going to be able to brake in a straight line. And when we don't brake in a straight line, that means we have to ease up on the brake pressure, because you can't brake fully in a straight line and be turning. For those of you who know about traction circle theories, then that's this playing out here. So we're going to be wanting about 90-95% brake pressure to start with, staying all the way over to the left, and then coming in quite late, sort of turning in where this green sort of concrete starts. And then you've got two options here. You can either stay completely off the curb, which is going to create a more stable car for you, although it will be at the loss of a little bit of track time, maybe a couple of hundredths of a second. Or you can go right up onto the grass, which will gain you more time, but it might leave you a bit liable to an unstable car. So I would use the grass in a qualifying or a hot lap situation, and I would stay off the grass in a race, just, you know, to preserve tyres, to make sure I'm consistently not making mistakes. Then coming out, there's a nice compression, which means the track elevation goes down and then it goes rapidly back up. So a bit like the compression at the Nordschleife. This is a bit less of a compression, but it still helps us out because we can accelerate out earlier than we think we can. We could still be pointing here, but then the compression will help us to straighten up, and we can take all of the green curb, the green concrete on the outside to extend our track even further. Coming into Druids, we're going to be looking at the orange part of the fence to start with. So this orange part of the fence here on the left hand side. We've also got one of those green panels again, so we could use that. I don't think you'll get away with braking at the one board. I think that's just a little bit too late, especially on these hard tyres. So then if we look at the track, it's cambered on entry, so the outside the track is higher than the inside the track. So generally, what I think works best is turning in a little bit earlier, because you can see on the outside, if you stay to the outside past this point, it starts to negatively camber, so the middle of the track is higher than the outside of the track, and that's going to push it out towards the outside the corner, onto the marbles, onto the dirty part of the circuit. So we're going to turn in a little bit earlier to avoid that, so we can make sure we hit the apex. It's going to be a bit of an early apex, but we don't necessarily need a late apex for a good run out, because the next straight is about 3 or 4 seconds long. It's not really going to hurt that much if you don't get a good exit out. So then we're going to be sticking to the inside, just taking a little bit of the curb. Don't take the grass or the high part of the curb, because you could unsettle the car. And then in these Group 4 cars, you can get on the power very, very early. You can come out all the way past the curb to this green Astro, but then all the way out to the right. And then the one board is a good place to start, but you can straighten up the car even further and brake at the beginning of this curb. So you can see just on the right, on the track side, the beginning of the white concrete. Be careful not to get anywhere past the curb, so the furthest you're going to want to go out is here. Anything further than that and the track starts to become quite dirty, because you're on a part of the track that has a little bit of dust before you get to the grass. Then we're going to be turning in, try for a late apex. We've got a relatively long straight ahead, but we're going to be clipping the curb but not the grass. We want to avoid the grass because that's going to make you understeer, and we can get a very, very good exit out of this corner. Again, all the way onto the Astro. You're not going to get any track limit penalties really at this point of the track, but make sure you just come off that before you reach the grass. So coming into the next one, the one board's a good place to start, and again we've got the green panel on the right hand side, which is in roughly the same place. I would go a bit further and go for braking at the end of the Astro, the sort of brown worn out Astro on the right hand side by trackside. And then this is the turn where we want to get the latest apex, because we've got a massive, massive long straight, and it's more important to carry 1, 2, 3 miles an hour faster down the straight than to take the corner a little bit faster. So we're going to take a wide entry, trail braking all the time. From here you're going to be coasting a little bit, maybe just dabbing the brakes, dabbing the accelerator, playing around. Then just past this sector line is where we're going to want to actually clip the apex. Round about where this big curb turns into a small curb. Now if you feel very, very confident, if you miss the big curb and get on the small curb or just slightly onto the grass, you could find a way to make the grass help you rotate the car on exit, but that's very, very dangerous. It's very, very risky, and 8-9 times out of 10 it's going to end up with a slide. So I would just stay off the curb, get as close as you can to it, about here on the white line is fine, and then exit out. Once you're on the accelerator, don't come off it, because that's going to ruin your exit, ruin all the hard work you've done in the corner. So and a general rule of thumb in any corner, once you're on the accelerator, you're on it, you're committed. Unless you're drastically going wide, you're on it, you don't come off the accelerator. Don't go wide onto this first curb because the curb narrows. So only go on that first curb as wide as you would go on the second curb, because we don't want to be touching the grass on the exit. And then down onto the long straight. Again, line of least resistance from the middle to the inside, to the outside. Scrub off as little speed as we can. Now we're going to be looking at the two board to start with, and this is a really difficult one because you've got to carry a lot of speed, and the make or break component to this corner, I would say, is how well you can modulate the brake pedal, how well you can dip the nose of the car, steer the car with the brakes in order to create the most downforce and carry the most downforce and therefore speed through the corner. So looking at the two board, bit further than that, we've got the Marshall, the orange fence, the green panel on the right hand side. That's a good place to look. I don't think you're going to be braking much later than this, certainly not going to be braking in this car with these tyres at the one board. So we're going to be coming from the outside the track, braking at about 50%, maybe a little bit less, easing up on the brakes, easing up, coasting, staying off the grass. You can touch the curb, but only this red and white bit, not the grey bit in between, because as you can see that disappears on the right here. Then we're going to be finding a place to get on the throttle. Again, only coming out to this narrow curb, and then for this one, the orange board, the orange fence and the green panel and the Marshall on the left hand side is going to be where you're wanting to brake for this one. Turning in very, very early, because you can absolutely abuse this curb. That's probably a little bit too much, because you still want two wheels on the actual circuit, and then as far wide as possible. What that's going to do is when you come off the curb, because it's such a high curb, the front of the car, especially because it comes down first, is the suspension's going to oscillate a little bit. So it's going to provide you a little bit more downforce on the exit, just momentarily. But luckily, when it loses downforce again, we can go right out even wider than the track will probably allow us, but we're not going to get a penalty for it, so why pass up the opportunity? Obviously, the further past the curb you go, the further towards the gravel you are, but this gravel doesn't necessarily bite too hard. Coming into Dingledale, we're going to be staying towards the left. We're not going to be going anywhere over to the right, because that means we're not going to be able to straighten up the car for the next corner. So we're going to stay on the left, and then braking just about the one board, or potentially, if you're brave, the green panel on the left hand side. And then same sort of story again, two wheels on the track, but we can take as much as we want on the inside, so that's about as much as you're going to be able to get away with grip wise. And then we're not going to go all the way out to the outside, because the track comes back in again, so there's a little tiny kink on the exit. So we're going to stay towards the middle and now go towards the outside. This one, we're looking at the Marshalls on the right hand side, can give us a very, very good indication. You could use the shadow, the beginning of the shadow, so about where I am now, which is the same sort of point. But when you're choosing your brake references, you always want something solid. And in Gran Turismo Sport, the Marshalls are pretty much solid. If not, you could use just before this Marshall hut, the Marshall sort of concrete building, because that's always going to be there. The shadows aren't necessarily always going to be there, so don't use them for braking references. Coming from the outside, we're going to be clipping the curb, not too much of the curb, because there is a camber element to this sort of turn. So this turn's very heavily cambered, so you want to stay on the track Not necessarily on the curb. In fact, I would probably miss the curb altogether if you're looking on a qualifying run, for example, because the further you get onto the curb, the less camber your car has, or the less negative roll your car has. So you're not going to be able to go through the corner as fast as possible if you're on the curb. So I would stay off the curb. At the very most, just take that first tiny bit of the curb, because that's not as cambered, I would say. Then coming out of the corner, careful on the throttle, be careful not to clip the grass on the outside. And then into the final one, looking at the 2 board to start with. And then just beyond that, there's another green panel on the tyre barrier. Between there and the 1 board, I don't think you're going to be getting away with braking on the 1 board. You'd have to be very, very good to do that. So braking at some point after this green panel, probably about here, halfway in between the 2 markers. And then again, we can turn in very, very early. Again, you could take the grass here if you wanted. It could help rotate the car, but it could also help it understeer. So it's completely up to you. I would personally stay off it, just for consistency's sake. So you can take the curb, but then be very, very careful on the exit, because it's going to want to push you out wide because the elevation changes. So make sure you're keeping a little bit of reserve in the tank for that. And then obviously on the hot lap, towards the inside for the shortest run to the line. And that is your track walk of Brands Hatch in the Group 4 cars.